Hello, children, and welcome to today's collective worship. And as you know, we always start our collective worships with starting by saying, "This is the day that the Lord has made." And we are all rejoicing because we're together at the start of a new week and thinking about what our focus of today's collective worship is going to be all about. So today, what I'd like us to think about is something that we have mentioned, and that is thinking about children's rights and responsibilities. And on the screen, you can see in blue, RRS. And some of you might say, well, what does RRS stand for? That actually stands for Rights Respecting School. And that's what we are at Lympsham and at East Brent. And when we are talking about rights, we're talking about things that all of you have in this world. And children's rights are very important because it means that grown-ups have to follow those rights and make sure that they happen. And today we're thinking about the right for children to be able to say what you think, but also to say what you think should happen, but also the right to be listened to. Okay, so it's quite a grown-up thing to be thinking about, but it's something that's very important for children to understand, that you do have rights. And for those of you that may have forgotten, there are actually 42 rights altogether that children have that have been established by the United Nations for the Convention of the Rights of the Child, otherwise known as the UNCRC. And although you might be thinking, oh, I don't really understand this, and I'm not sure why Mrs. Robertson is talking about it, hopefully, when grown-ups talk to you about it a bit more, you will see the importance of children all having rights. And as you can see from my picture, you can see children there saying, I want to be something when I grow up. And it might be a lawyer, a teacher, a doctor, a football player. It might be a hairdresser. It might be anything. I'm sure lots of you are sat there thinking, I know what I want to be when I grow up. But let's find out about what today's collective worship is going to help us think about. Imagine if you were a child who couldn't read, couldn't write, or understand anything that somebody said to you. That's a really difficult thing to think about because some of our reception children are just starting to learn about reading, writing, phonics, sounds. And we learn so much when we first start school. And as we progress through the school, we learn even more. So we start in reception, then we move into year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. I'm sure our year 4s are sat there thinking, I've learnt loads. I can read, I can write, I can do lots of things, and I'm ready to move on to the next stage of my education. But there are some children in this world that can't do that. They haven't learnt any nursery rhymes, they haven't learned how to read, they haven't learned any phonics, they haven't learned how to spell, they don't know how to add up, they don't know how to do lots of things. Just imagine if you were one of those children. Imagine how that might feel. Now in this picture, you can see lots of children sat looking at actually a really clever, looks like a carpet, but it's a map of the whole world. And these children are talking about children that live all around the world. Now, some of you have visited different countries in the world. Some of you might not have even left England. Some of you may be thinking, I wish I could find out a bit more about children that live on the other side of the world. But sometimes children don't get the opportunity to even talk about it, or see pictures, or find out about life beyond where we live. Imagine if we didn't know anything about life outside East Brent or outside Lymsham. It would be very difficult for us, and difficult for you to understand what happens all around the world, which is why it is so important when you're at school that we teach you about things like this. What happens around the world? What happens in different countries? Imagine a world where we didn't have doctors and we didn't have nurses. Imagine a world where we didn't have scientists or really clever people. People that in the last 2 years have had to come up with something like a COVID vaccination to save people's lives. Imagine if we didn't have those people. It's quite difficult for you when you're so young to understand why we need such important people in our world. But having doctors, having nurses, having scientists, having really clever people to help us survive in this world is so important. And that's why when you're at school, we talk to you about what you might like to be when you get older. And being a doctor or a nurse or a scientist is something that is so important. But sometimes children don't get the chance to even think about that. They don't get a chance to even think, what do I want to do when I leave school? But hopefully, when you're at school, you get the chance to think about these things. Imagine if children didn't know about their rights. Now, as I said right at the very beginning, being a rights respecting school means that all the grown-ups in our school are responsible for making sure you understand your rights, but also your responsibilities. And that's why at the beginning of the year, you all wrote a class charter. You agreed what your rights were in your class, but you also agreed what you all had to do to respect those rights. So you've got rights, but you've also got responsibilities. If we didn't know about those, we would not understand what we can or can't do. Now imagine if children weren't able to speak out and say what they thought or what they believed. There's a picture here of children actually going on what we call a march, talking about some of the things that they have had to think about. They want to be able to speak out. They want to be able to say what they think. And that's what all of you should be able to do as well. You should always be able to speak out and say what you think. And we at school should always provide you with the opportunity to do that. Imagine when you were at school, if you never reached your goals or your dreams. You can see here, Teddy's trying to reach for something very special. Imagine if you never learnt your spellings, or you didn't learn your times tables, or you never learnt your first sounds to help you read or write. It must be very hard for some children in the world who don't reach their goals or their dreams. But hopefully, when you're at school, that's what we all help you to do. Did you know this important fact that 67 million primary age children are not in school? Now, some of you might think, oh, that's not very much. That's not a large number. But actually, it is. And that's not just in England, that's all around the world. And some children don't get the opportunity to actually go to school or speak out or have any rights to be at school or learn or have an education. And that is not right, but that is a fact. Now I'm going to share a story about a young girl who actually was 11 years old when this happened. Her name is Malala. And many years ago, going back actually to 2009, she actually published a diary, and she published it on the BBC, which is one of our television channels. Some of you might watch programs on the BBC. And she actually published it using the name Gul Makai, which was a heroine in a Pashtun folk tale. Now, Malala was a young lady who wanted to speak out. She felt she had the right to speak out, and she did. And she actually spoke out about the right for young girls to have an education in Pakistan, which is in India, and it was where she lived. And unfortunately, in her village, more and more young girls stopped wearing uniform. They started dropping out of school because it wasn't seen as the right thing for girls to go to school. But she spoke out and she had a voice, and people started to listen to her. But one day she actually got hurt and it stopped her from speaking out. Now, Malala then came to England to live, and she came with her father. And her father was actually given a really important job working in the Pakistani embassy, which was in a place called Birmingham, which we know, some of you will know, is in England. And they stayed there for 3 years. And Malala eventually got better. And when she was better, she actually went to a high school in Edgbaston. Now, several years later, on July the 12th, it was Malala's 16th birthday. She was invited to address a whole audience, and it was at the United Nations, which I started telling you about earlier in the collective worship. And it was a huge audience, but it was an audience that was especially for a youth assembly. So young people like Malala, who was allowed to speak out. And she said, I want to speak up for the right of children to have an education. Every child should have an education. And she was listened to, and everybody respected her because she was so brave. She got better, she recovered, and was able to speak up for every girl in the country. And there you can see her talking in front of all those groups of people. she spoke to everybody and said, I feel that I have gained so much power and strength since I have started speaking up for every child in the country. I hope everybody has hopes and dreams like I did. Now, Malala was so well respected and admired by people from all around the world. In 2014, she actually was given the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a huge recognition and achievement for somebody so young. And she is now somebody in history that everybody remembers because she spoke up for the right for children to have an education. So that is the story of Malala, and hopefully has helped you understand why the right for all of you to have an education is so important. It also means, though, that all children have the responsibility to listen and to learn and to respect all the grown-ups that are teaching you. Hopefully that's given you all something to think about today. We're going to put our hands together and we're just going to reflect for a moment and think, we're all very lucky to be at school. We're all lucky to be here together. We're all lucky to be learning with one another and to just be thankful for this moment in time. Now, some of you might like to close your eyes. Some of you might like to just read the prayer with me. We're going to say, God in heaven, hear my prayer. Keep me in thy loving care. Be my guide in all I do. Bless all of those who love me too. Amen. Okay, so that's our collective worship this week from Mrs. Robertson, and I hope that's all given you something to think about. Remember, children have rights. There are 42 of them altogether. Ask a grown-up in your class to show you your Rights Respecting Schools poster, and on there you will see all the different rights that children have. Thank you for listening. And I will see you all very soon. Let's finish by saying, this is the day that the Lord has made. And let us all rejoice and be glad in it. Thank you for listening, children, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye for now. Bye.